Start a Therapy Practice Podcast, episode number 40. Hey there, how you doing? This is Scott Harmon, occupational therapist, private practice clinic owner, here to help you take your private practice to the next level. I appreciate you tuning in today and allowing me a little bit of time in your earbuds or in your car or wherever you're at today. Super excited to be with you. Today, I've got an interview with Debra Young. She's an occupational therapist, and Debra is a certified specialist in environmental modifications, aging in place, and assistive technology. This is a different kind of business, and I'm super excited to share it with you. My wife got so excited that I was interviewing Debra. She was like, wow, that is a really kind of a different line of private practice. And I really enjoyed picking Debra's brain as far as environmental modifications and her private practice. In this episode, we'll mention quite a few web links, and I'll put those in the show notes at startatherapypractice.com/40. And that way you can visit all of the websites that Debra and I mentioned today. You'll certainly want to check out her own website, which is empowerability.com, EMPOWER ability.com, empowerability.com. And over there, she has a page with webinars. She has webinars directed towards home builders or potential customers, but she also has webinars geared towards the therapist who's interested in starting an environmental modification business. So you'll definitely want to check that out over there at empowerability.com. Before we get to that interview, I just want to touch on ICD-10 because we're right there at that time where it just happened, aren't we? Or it happened not too long ago. And hopefully it's not as big a hiccup as some people are predicting. I think there's a lot of scaremongers out there who, would like for you to think this is the end of the world. But hopefully your providers and insurance payers, Medicaid, Medicare, hopefully they're smoothing this out and have it all running smooth right now. My private practice uses an online EMR, and I know they've been doing some automatic crossovers, so hopefully that's really going to help us out. If you've not went by the website at startatherapypractice.com, I've kind of revamped it a little bit. It looks a little bit different. Put a video right there at the top just to explain what the website does and what it's about. I also have some free stuff over there, free forms that I use in my private practice and checklists, all kinds of good information that you can use, a client tracking spreadsheet that you can pick up for free over there. And with that, let's get to the interview with Debra Young. Here we go. I'm joined today with Debra Young. Debra is an occupational therapist, and she is a specialist in home modifications. Debra, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm good. I'm blessed and better than I should be. So it's a good day, and I'm super excited to visit with you. I was talking to my wife. I said, hey, I got a podcast interview today. My wife's also an OT. So she came down here and we were looking at your website, and she was rattling off a bunch of questions. She was like, whoa, this is cool stuff. You need to ask her this and this. But she was super excited that I was going to have you on today. So I want you to tell us how you went from what you were doing before home modification as an OT, and then how you got into home modification.
Sure. I've been an occupational therapist for 20 years. And, I fell in love with the specialty of doing some kind of home modifications and or assistive technology actually as a student. I remember back, I don't remember what year it was, but one of our assignments was to go out into the community. I think it was senior year, go out into the community and anywhere in the community, just take an ADA survey and determine if that space would be accessible for someone if they were using a wheelchair specifically. And I remember I took that and I went to a previous boyfriend's home, and I was just at his apartment, and it was automatically 6 steps down because it was one of those apartments where you had to walk down first. It was like a basement apartment. And, that in and of itself, and then very tight space, very inaccessible at every level. And it just really stuck with me. I was like, it was my light bulb moment as a student. I was like, I would love to be able to do something like this. I don't know if there's a job that would allow me to do this full time, but I would love to do this. And my very first job was at McGee Rehab in Philadelphia, and I started on the spinal cord injury unit. And that's actually what I really wanted because I enjoyed learning about that as a student. And at that time, we were lucky to be able to, not for every patient, but for many patients, go on a home visit and be able to do an accessibility assessment to determine if they were going to have difficulty with going home after they left us. We also had a huge sort of portion of our department that was to assistive technology. So I really fell in love with the assistive technology, the adaptive modifications, all the seating and positioning and mobility equipment, and the environmental modifications piece when I was working on that unit. And I went on to, one of the things at McGee is they wanted you to be a generalist and not a specialist. So they put you on multiple units. Whether you liked it or not, you got bumped to the next unit. And it really gave me a great opportunity to learn about different areas of occupational therapy, such as the stroke rehab unit. And I was on an amputee team for a while. I did inpatient and outpatient brain injury. And then they had a community reentry program, which then again solidified my love for bringing people out into the community, looking at the environment and seeing how it impacts people with their day-to-day activities, including, being able to get transportation to go to work, and do the things that are meaningful for them. It continued to increase my love for that. I went from there, I moved from Philadelphia to Atlanta, and I worked at Shepherd Center. And at Shepherd Center, I worked coma recovery brain injury, and then moved all the way through to outpatient community reentry brain injury again. And in that setting, again, I was able to bring everybody out in the community. We were going to Atlanta Braves games. We were, just going out of the community, going grocery shopping. We had a residential component where we had to make sure that their rooms and the setup of the space was going to work for them. We were also doing home evaluations before they left us to make sure that they were safe at home. So still, as an inpatient therapist, I was very lucky to have a lot of these great experiences. And by the time I moved multiple times. By the time I moved back up to Maryland, at that point, I started to go per diem in my career because I wanted to build my business. Because I thought to myself, this was after 6 years of being an OT, I'd really love to be able to do this full time. What I ended up doing was going per diem and going back to school and getting my master's in education, but it was a specialty in assistive technology. So I wanted to be able to help be able to branch out in a way that I could get to home modifications, but I found that to be a daunting task, and there were very few jobs to locate doing something where I could do home mods 100% of the time unless it was my own business. So I figured, okay, well, as I'm trying to start this business, maybe I'll be able to get jobs doing assistive technology as an occupational therapist, since they are more readily available, and then go from there and continue to build my business. And that's essentially what I did. After doing the per diem for a few years and going back to school, I started to build the business. I worked first as an assistive technology specialist for Easter seals out of southeastern Pennsylvania. And then I started doing work and building my own business, became a complete sole proprietor, 11 years ago, a sole proprietor. During that time, though, I was still doing assistive technology, but I was doing it actually for a school district. And in doing assistive technology for a school district, one of the roles I had was not just AT for making sure they could access the curriculum. It was also doing the environmental modifications as well, making sure that if there was a fire and there was a student that used a wheelchair and they were on the second level of a building, that the staff, one, had an evacu track to get them out, and two, had training to be able to safely do so. So along with making sure that all the buildings were accessible and the classrooms allowed the kids to be able to get in and out. And during that time, that's when I slowly built my business to be able to decrease the amount of contracts that were more assistive technology contracts to doing more true 100% environmental modifications with multiple contracts, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense, yes. I want you to explain, was there any difficulty when you were making that transition from your per diem contracts going to your home modification contracts? Often that's a difficult jump to make financially.
It really is. And I found that I always had at least one contract for a long time that I knew I would get a certain amount of money per week consistently. When I was working for the school district, I was actually doing 35 to 40 hours a week for them. So it was still full time. And when I left the school district, I was working part time. I was doing then 20 hours a week. And then the rest of the hours had to be on me for the other contracts I could get that were through specifically my business. Even though that 20 hours, it was through my business, I knew I was going to get 20 hours of solid work a week. And then from there, I went down to a contract that was 8 hours a week to everything's on me with any and all contracts that I get now or independent referrals. One of the things that I did in slowly kind of going down with the specific contracts that I tried to make sure that those contracts still aligned with what I was doing as a business. Like that assistive technology contract with school districts still aligned. Then the next contract that was 20 hours a week was for young adults with severe intellectual disabilities. It was a day program for them. And what I did was I ensured that they had the adaptations for all of the different activities they were doing throughout the day, and then also modified their environment as needed based on their sensory needs. So again, it was still assistive technology and environmental modifications. And then when I switched it down to a contract where I worked only 8 hours per week consistently, that was with a low vision optometrist, and I was doing low vision occupational therapy, but it's really primarily assistive technology and environmental modifications for that person with a low vision diagnosis. But yeah, it was always a matter of trying to decrease the amount of time I had in these other contracts to be able to spend more time on my business, knowing that I had to, be able to make that jump and know that it's going to be a roller coaster with the revenue coming in, but then to finally let go of that last 8 hours, it was scary, but I was glad I did it. It came to a point where I needed those 8 hours. I needed those 8 hours for my business, and it was actually getting in the way.
How did you connect with the developmental optometrist?
It was just really by accident, actually. I was in that one contract that was 20 hours a week, and I was just looking to see if there might be anything. And it was through, I happened to be on the Delaware Occupational Therapy Association website for something completely separate. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to peek and see what kind of jobs there are right now for OTs in Delaware. And there was one posted for her. And I thought, she's only looking for 1 day a week? Like, this might be a good next step down from this 20-hour position to really give me more time to work on the projects that I'm doing for my business. And she did some on-the-job training because there's obviously some extra things in there that she wanted us to know because we were actually working with the lenses, and the lens kit, which we don't get taught in OT school. So that was really cool. And I thought on-the-job training and 1 day a week, I can do this. And it ended up working out really well for me.
Yeah, that's a great fit. What a great find.
It was luck. It was complete kismet as far as I was concerned.
That is cool.
What's
very cool?
It was very cool because I had previous clients that had macular degeneration, and I did their home eval. So I was already doing some home evals for low vision, but I really feel that job, I understood low vision, but I feel like I had a whole different base for low vision after working with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had the opportunity to go with one of my clients to a developmental optometrist for an evaluation. He had pretty severe autism.
Okay.
He did fine with it, and it was very interesting to watch her go through that evaluation. I learned a lot just watching her do the eval.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure you learned a lot on the job training.
Absolutely. It was a wonderful experience.
Wow. So you started with a developmental optometrist, and then tell us how you grew from there. How did you find clients beyond that?
As a sole proprietor, I was just working with the school district. But then when I changed the business to a limited liability company, so I was a sole proprietor for about almost, I think it was 4 years. For 4.5 years. And then I switched it over to a limited liability company. So that way I could have a little more, that veil of liability between your personal assets and your business. And then also too, I wanted my business to be sort of on its own versus it being Debra Young's sole proprietor, because I felt that some of the agencies, associations, and businesses that I was going to contact, they might feel better knowing that it's an LLC versus just a sole proprietor, sort of independent contractor, freelance person. So what I did was, in the very beginning of turning into that LLC, I got very involved with what was happening in Delaware. I started to attend as many possible meetings as I could. And I know that that's not easy for people to do, but it was meetings that I was interested in, such as, we have a subcommittee on aging, for Newcastle County, which is where I live in the northern portion of Delaware. And I got involved, and got a seat on that board. And I wanted to meet the people that were there, that were making decisions for the aging population in Newcastle County. And that was one of the things I did. I started writing a lot more. I started writing articles for anybody who would let me write for them. I would contact different venues and I would say, hey, I have an article on this. Would you be interested? I specifically found an article. I remember I read an article for this one trade magazine, and they were talking about accessibility and aging in place, and they actually mentioned occupational therapy. And I felt that they were incorrect with multiple statements. So I actually contacted the publisher and I said, hey, I saw this article. I'm glad that you're voicing information about this content, but I think that there are some statements in here that have miscommunicated the content. And I'd love to be able to write you an article on the role of occupational therapy in home modifications. And they took me up on it. So doing things like that, I really started contacting as many people and let them know, hey, I'd love to write an article. I'd love to write a paragraph, blog post, whatever you want. And that was helpful in trying to get my name out there and what I did and specify that I was an occupational therapist.
Very good. So now, did you start taking on private clients then at the same time?
I did. I didn't, and I still don't have a huge advertising and marketing budget. So, my hopes with doing the, presenting and publishing, it was going to help provide that. Contacting state agencies and disability associations as well. But in the meantime, with the very minimal marketing and advertising that I was doing, I was receiving some calls from independent clients wanting me to do their home modifications. I also was starting to get contracts with state agencies and disability associations, and then put in, then I started to learn, okay, there's this request for a proposal process. And starting to look for those RFPs and put in for them. The one thing that I did learn, and I wish one of those things you wish you learned faster, is when RFPs come out and when things are due. Because I found in the beginning that as I was learning about these opportunities, I was a little too late. It always seemed like I would have just missed the opportunity to put something in by a week or a month. And so I started to log all the dates, say I will not miss this for next year, so I could put in a request for proposal or a bid so they could use my services.
What good tip can you give us for those who are not familiar with RFPs, requests for proposals, and as far as how to find that maybe in your local area?
I don't know what they do in the other states, but I know in the state of Delaware, they have an actual registry for any and all businesses that you can sign up to receive alerts for when any state requests for proposals come out, and you choose categories so that it will help to, if you check off the category for, I think I've checked off the remodeling category, if there's a remodeling, or if I checked off for allied health professionals as well, I think it was. So if any RFP comes up with that tag, they'll send you an email automatically. So that's one thing that I did. The other thing that I did was, again, I contacted just about every disability association in my state. I wanted to find out if they had funding for home modifications, and if so, did they have an RFP process, or do they just vet their vendors? And if they had an RFP process, I figured out when it was, and then I was able to put my name on a list for it, or I just kept watch of it and really stalked the website for when it would come out within that month that they told me. But I think that those are great avenues to first go through. Area agency on aging, they also typically, not every state will have some kind of RFP process for providing home modifications to their beneficiaries. And so that's one of the ways that I was able to find out when some of these RFPs came out that I could put in for.
Is that a majority of your business, or do you also get individuals calling you or contacting you for some home modification?
I get both. I will say that the bulk probably does come from state agencies and disability associations if I have to compare the two. But I do get independent persons contacting me. And one of the ways that at this point, some of my marketing dollars, some of my marketing and advertising dollars will go towards doing things like, for instance, there's a senior center that's not far from me, and they're actually doing sometimes they do health fairs, but this time they're actually doing a housing fair, and they're going to talk about all things housing. And so they know of me because I've been to their previous health fairs, and I've exhibited at their health fairs, and so they contacted me to help out with doing something for them with their housing fair. But I'll also I'm very involved with my Home Builders Association, and they have it's their big event every year where they're doing it's the home show, the home and garden show. And I always exhibit at the home and garden show. So I find where there might be some kind of health fair or fair that has to do with housing, and I will try to exhibit there as well. But again, it's highly dependent. Some of those are free. Some of those might be a nominal fee, such as $25 to exhibit for a few hours, but some of them can be very expensive and they're just outside my budget to do so. Conferences as well. I have exhibited at very few conferences, like the Alzheimer's Association in Delaware has a conference, and you can exhibit there. But those are usually a higher price for the table and the exhibit, and it's usually outside my range to do so.
Very interesting. Now, on your website, which is empowerability.com,
yes,
and I'll put a link in the show notes to that also, it mentions that you have a certification, you're specially certified in environmental modification, SCEM, through
correct.
AOTA.
Yes.
There's a lot of acronyms there. So describe how someone would go about becoming certified that way.
What you need to do is, if you're interested, definitely go online to AOTA, and there's information under each one of those, and then there's information under the environmental modification area. There's also, you can download the actual application. The application is really a portfolio application where you are kind of looking at what you have done so far in your career in that specialty area, this area being environmental mods, and basically you're showing evidence that you have provided specialty practice in environmental modifications for the reviewers that are going to be reading that application. I'm talking this way because I actually sat on the board for advanced specialty certification, so I'm trying to think of it just in terms of environmental mods. Essentially, some of the base requirements are amount of years as an OT. You have to have at least 5 years of experience just as an occupational therapist. And then off the top of my head, I believe it's 600 hours within the specialty area itself that you have to demonstrate. And that might be if you're working for someone and they can sign off on that for you. That's one way to demonstrate that not only do you have your 5 years experience, but the hours for the specialty as well. And so that's the first requirement. The next requirement in the application, you go through all of the different criterion, which are taken from our continuing competency standards, such as, knowledge for evaluation. It's funny because I just got off this board and I'm already forgetting all of it. It's how quick this goes. Knowledge for evaluation. For specialty certification, there are 12 to be able to fill out. And so you're going through each one of those criterion and you're picking an activity that demonstrates that you have shown specialty practice within that and that meets that criterion. And for each of those criterion, there are specific activities that you can choose from. So off the top of my head, for showing that you have knowledge for evaluation in environmental modifications, you can pick an independent learning activity that you may have completed, a formal learning activity that you may have completed, and I believe there's 2 other options for that particular one that would be evidence to show that you've met that criterion. That's sort of the middle portion of the application. And then the last portion of the application is a self-assessment. And in your self-assessment, you're really thinking about what you've done in your career for that specialty area, where you see your specialty area changing in the future, and how you will change with those changes to meet that demand. And then the other piece of that then goes to your professional development goals. What reviewers usually want to see in your self-assessment is thinking, as you're going through this process and thinking about the criterion, which areas you feel you're strong in and which areas you want to learn more about. And so those areas that you would potentially want to learn more about would be your professional development goals. So it's quite reflective. And so those goals that you create would be goals that you would meet within the next 5 years after certification. And that would be used toward recertification. So the whole process is a reflective portfolio. And then it is reviewed by a minimum of 2 reviewers and then the board itself, showing that you are demonstrating that specialty practice in environmental modifications. It's quite a lengthy process. For me, it took about 6 months to pull everything together. Some people are faster. They might pull it together in a month to 3 months, but it's not something that you can do quickly.
Well, otherwise everybody would do it, right?
Absolutely.
It wouldn't be as important.
Absolutely.
It also says that you are a certified aging-in-place specialist. Describe what that is.
That's a certification through the National Association of Home Builders. AOTA is I don't know if the right word is partner, but they have been consulted in the creation of the Certified Aging-in-Place Specialist course. And the way I look at the CAPS course, I'm a CAPS instructor too. The way I look at that course when I took it, I think it's a great opportunity for OTs to really be able to see how the other side thinks, see how builders and remodelers and the building industry professionals to learn and understand where they're coming from and their perspective, and then be able to try and meld our perspectives together so that we are working as an interprofessional team. I think the CAPS course for building professionals is an awareness for them about working with someone in the older adult population, being that they don't get a lot of the information about working with older adults. It's more of specifically the construction and structural integrity. So for them, it's a huge awareness and a learning curve. For occupational therapists, I think that really it comes down to getting their perspective, since the one piece is about design. And I think that there are definitely examples of how to build, remodel, and create a modified environment that occupational therapists might definitely not have heard about previously. But in general, I think that it's a nice way to bridge the gap between the medical and the building industries.
So would you say that those 2 certifications are sort of a must in order to, be successful at marketing your skills in your specific geographical location if somebody were interested in doing that?
I would say that they definitely provide an advantage for when you have independent clients contacting you, as well as agencies and associations contacting you. The specialty certification in environmental modifications right now, because there are so few occupational therapists that are certified through AOTA, it's less than 1% nationally. That is a huge piece of marketing that can be used to your advantage as an OT that does home and environmental modifications. And it's a really nice way, too, if any OTs are doing any kind of expert witness testimony, or if they, for any reason, have to work with a lawyer or any kind of case, having that credential also puts a little bit of backing behind what you're going to say. That usually a jury and a judge are happy to see that you have some kind of credentials behind you showing your specialty practice. The CAPS, I think that is definitely something that's of benefit as an OT to be able to have to show that there's a link to that building industry for sure.
Okay, very good. What would you suggest if somebody was interested in doing something similar? How would you go about doing a market analysis in that location to see if that even might be feasible?
I did my market analysis. One of the ways I did market analysis was I actually had a mentor when I moved to Baltimore, right outside of Baltimore, I actually, even though you can do this outside of Baltimore, I happened to move just outside of Baltimore and then find Shoshana Schomburg, who at that time, and she's still running courses, was doing an online course mentorship because I knew I wanted to start my business. And I wanted a little help doing so from somebody who had been established as an occupational therapist doing something that I was interested in. And I contacted Shoshana, and she became my mentor for a few years. That was back in 2001. So for a few years, she was my mentor to help me in the process of building that business. And in doing so, she helped me with learning she helped me, one, with that market analysis, because she was doing market analysis and she provided that information to me. And then two, sort of did the information from her and her group of therapists that she was mentoring. And I had information from them as well with regard to a market analysis. That's one way I did. The second way I did that was, in my area at the time, there weren't many OTs doing any of this. So what I started to do was get information on what was being charged for occupational therapy services, period. And just really getting an idea of those CPT codes and how much it was actually being charged to Medicare and Medicaid. And from there, I was able to help to establish my fee. The other piece that I used as well was it was more readily available to find information on how much somebody who is an assistive technology specialist was charging if they were a consultancy versus if somebody was a home modification specialist charging in a private practice situation. So I did a market analysis on assistive technology fees for evaluation and training as well. And from there, I looked at those fees and I said to myself, well, where would I place myself? And in the beginning, I placed myself not at the bottom, but just a little bit higher than that. And when I was getting those RFPs and I was putting in the pricing, I would fill it in from there and we'd see how it goes. And if they accepted it, it's like, okay, we're good. However, there were the last piece of market analysis I did, and this is based off of some programs that are some state programs and some programs that are run, such as community development block grant money that is available for home modifications. They have more of a set idea of what they're willing to give you for a home modification assessment and then a follow-up visit, which tends to be a little bit lower. So I also was using their information for market analysis as well.
Okay, that's good insight right there. I appreciate that. Very good. Tell us about a typical RFP environmental modification that you would do, and then also environmental modification that you would do for an individual.
The only difference is if they have a specific amount of funds that they are able to use for the project. For instance, in the state of Delaware, there was a time when I was doing some occupational therapy home assessments for Medicaid clients, and the specific to those clients that were the long-term care waiver. And this was a home assessment specifically. So I was not doing a traditional OT assessment. It was specific to environmental modifications. And they have very set limits on how much they're willing to spend per occurrence, and then within a year, and then for lifetime. So you have to, it's not that you don't give the recommendations that you think are appropriate. You want to make sure that you're still giving appropriate recommendations, but staying within the limits of the budget. And making sure that I always was very careful to make sure that what I was providing was be flexible enough if there was going to be a change, because you anticipated that if it was just for the occurrence, that there could be another occurrence within that year, or there could, because they had a lifetime cap, that person may have some tweaks to what's happening with that home during some time. So you want to make sure that what was recommended met the budget, but also met their needs and was flexible for future changes. Versus if I was for that RFP and that particular client, I might only be going in there just for the bathroom or just for the entryway. I'm not necessarily going to be looking at 4 or 5 spaces in a home. Whereas somebody who contacts me independently, I still might only be looking at a bathroom or an entry, but I really try to give them One, we talk about what the funding source is and if it's them, or sometimes I'm actually looking for and coordinating funding for the person, if we can find something for them so that they don't have to pay out of pocket. Needless to say, if it's coordinated funding or if it's being a situation where they are paying out of pocket, which for those persons who are contacting me, that's the majority rule. What happens is I'm trying to give them recommendations that meet a broad spectrum for their needs and then what can be done in that space. So that way, not every time does somebody have to do a full-scale remodel of their bathroom. Is that a possible option? Sure. But I do give them a few different options where it might be a more low-tech situation or, more adaptive equipment situation versus something that might require some remodel versus something that might be a full-scale remodel. And so that we discuss them usually on the day of the assessment so that I could gauge what they're interested in doing. And I'm also giving them the pros and cons of each situation, because you can do some very small durable medical equipment things, but that might not be meet long-term needs. So I discuss with them, you might put money out up front for these pieces of equipment, but this might not meet your need in 3 to 5 years. Or you can do something like this that might be flexible for you now and in 3 to 5 years, but may not meet your needs if anything else could change along the way. Or you might be, if you have the funding to do something like this, you could do a full-scale remodel, and it might assist you to live here for the rest of your life and then also give you full resale value on your home. It sounds like I'm giving the third one the best positive aspect, not necessarily because it's usually the most money, but it's good I try to give them pros and cons in each situation, whereas I can't necessarily provide all of those 3 options to my person who is constrained by a budget that's provided to them by Medicaid or another association. I still try to give them as much information as possible because they may have funding on their own other than what's being provided to them by, I'm thinking of a disability association versus Medicaid client.
So then how close do you work with the builder? How are you making that communication happen?
Very close. Sometimes, and it depends on the situation, I have a tendency to like to go into the house first by myself. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes I'm going in on that first visit with a builder or an architect, and sometimes it's an interior designer, depending on who is playing in our game. I typically like to go in first because I want to see what's going on. I want to create that rapport with the client. Maybe, because we're going to get some of that private information and have discussions about things like bathing and toileting, which that person may not necessarily want to discuss in front of another person, especially if it's a builder or a remodeler. So I try to get in there first. But even if I get in there first, even if I'm doing the assessment, I am always having some kind of collaboration with that person who is doing the construction piece. Because I find that if that doesn't happen, something can go wrong with my recommendations being translated into their structural construction piece. And so I want to ensure that I have some kind of collaboration with them before they get started. If it's something like a full-scale remodel, I want to be in there before they actually finish it, before they do anything that's going to require they'd have to rip it out and make major changes. So yeah, it could be from start to finish, depending on the needs of the person and how extensive the recommendations are and the construction on the space.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, have you come across a modification where money was not an object and they were like, I need this done, and you were able to make any recommendation you want? That would be fun to me. I would be like, all right, this is going to be kind of fun.
I've had one client that I did have, and it was actually the client was, I worked with the client and his caregivers, and the client was 13 years old, and 13 years old, and he was, had cerebral palsy, and his caregivers were his aunt and his uncle, and they had a settlement. There was a case for him, so he actually had settlement money. And what they were doing was they were building a home from scratch. And the plan was for his aunt and uncle to age in place in that home, and then for him to also age in place in that home, and to be able to receive care in that home for as long as he needed. So not only were they building from scratch, they I was able to work from beginning to end with them on this project, which is great. They did pull me in a little bit late. They pulled me in at the where they had already framed the house. So it probably would have been better had they pulled me in when they were designing the house so that I could look at the floor plans and make changes based on the needs of the client, because they had to make changes to the already framed out bathroom. And his already framed out bedroom, multiple bathrooms, I should say. And the irony in it was they were really focused on his needs, and they weren't even thinking about their own aging in place needs. So part of this was I was there primarily for him based on their referral to me to bring me in. But I started to discuss with them some things that they might want to think about for aging in place as well. But it was strange, but very liberating to say, hey, because she wanted a certain look in the bathroom, and she was talking about wood. And I was like, well, what about a bamboo grab bar? And she loved it. So they have a bamboo grab bar.
That sounds like a fun job right there.
That was a fun job, yes. And it met his needs, and they continue to care for him, and so it's working out for them as caregivers as well. So it was it's a win-win.
That's super rewarding. That's great. That's why we get into business, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell me how you go about charging for your services.
Well, because it could be anything, as I was saying, it could be somebody who's, one, if it's an RFP, it's usually a set contract, because within the actual request for proposal, they're asking you for a specific dollar amount for, and each RFP is a little bit different, but most of the RFPs that I filled out, they'll ask for a dollar amount for your evaluation and a dollar amount for, not hourly amount, just like this set amount for your evaluation, regardless of how long you're taking your time on it, and then set amount for training. Versus if I'm receiving a lead from somebody who's an independent client and they're contacting me, I have a phone call with them first just to get an idea of what the project actually is. Because, again, it could be multiple rooms in a home. It could be building from the ground up like we talked about. It could be a remodel and an addition onto a house, or it could be just looking at an entryway or just a bathroom. And I kind of gauge based on what they tell me on the phone how long it's going to take me if I come to their home to do that assessment. And then from there, based on what they're telling me on the phone, it gives me more information on the needs of the client, even without seeing them yet. It gives me an idea of how extensive the recommendations might be, and how much need that this particular client might have. And if they're, looking at it from short-term to long-term, that helps me to figure out roughly how long it's going to take me to write up the report. And then also figuring out, am I going to do follow-up training, which I recommend, but it's not, I don't make that mandatory. I do toy with the idea of making it mandatory, but I don't make it mandatory. I do put it in there as highly recommended to do the follow-up training with them on the equipment, which for the most part they do take. So I add all of that in, and I usually give them a project estimate based on how many hours I think it's going to take me to get all that done. On average, doing a few rooms in a house, I'm probably at the house doing the assessment for about 2 hours. The write-up is usually right around 2 hours. If it's a really average versus, straightforward. Sometimes the report might be slightly longer if there are some extensive recommendations or extenuating circumstances, either with the space or with the particular client.
Okay, that makes sense. I know you're doing some continuing education and some webinars. Tell us what those are about. Unpack that as far as how people can access those.
Well, as I said, I've been an OT for 20 years, and I've been doing environmental modifications work as a private sole proprietor, and then as Empowerability now for 10 years altogether with both. And over the last 10 years, I've had a lot of great clients that I worked with. And I found that I was doing a lot of presentations about home and environmental modifications at conferences, and that I was frequently educating the building professionals about, what I do and how I do it. So I thought, well, I have a lot of content here. I have a ton of these really great case studies. Why don't I just put them into different webinars? And it was a matter of taking the content that I had as far as case studies are concerned, and then taking all the content that I've previously used in some of my presentations and adding some more in to beef them up, and then making them into webinars, and then a 2-day course for inclusive housing, really. One day being about space planning and design, and the second day about building your business if you wanted to do a business in home modifications. And those are accessible by my website right now. I have 2 available. The first 2 I pulled content for and case studies for are inclusive bathrooms, and that'll be on September 17th, and then inclusive kitchens, and that'll be on the 23rd. And the 2-day course is in the process of being scheduled. I'm just waiting on a few logistics to finalize that.
If people miss those, is there a way to watch those as a replay?
Not as an instant replay yet. Right now, they are all just live webinars. So live webinars with me. I will be putting them through again. And I do have other content. I've already created some other webinars, so I'm in the process of scheduling them in for different areas of the home, because we did kitchen baths, but we have doors and doorways, second story access, everything you wanted to know about a grab bar. I have one on low vision home modifications, and then, things like home modifications for pediatric considerations. And then one of the other areas that I have a focus on are home modifications for persons with dementia. And so I've done previous presentations that I've turned into a webinar now on what I call connected caregiving. And so it integrates the technology that you can integrate into the home and into the environment itself to help for environmental modifications for persons with dementia.
All that continuing education and webinars is over at empowerability.com, correct?
That's correct.
Very good. And I'll put a link in the show notes to that. Very good. Well, we better wrap this up. I've learned so much. This has been great. I've been enlightened here, and I appreciate you taking the time to visit with me today, Debra.
Oh, thank you for having me. I truly appreciate being here.
I want you to let people know how they can contact you if they're interested.
Sure. They are more than welcome to email me. That's the best way to reach me. And that's DYoung, YOUNG, at empowerability.com. You can also call. I'm much faster with email than I am by phone, but the phone number is 302-504-6067. There's also a contact form on my website that if they wanted to submit a specific question about something, and that'll automatically come to my email. That's easier for them as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Debra.
Thank you.
All right. Wasn't that interesting? That is a different kind of private practice, isn't it? And Debra does a great job of finding those environmental modification contracts, mostly through government agencies. So I hope you learned something. Be sure to go by the website at startatherapypractice.com/40, and you can check out all the links that Debra mentions in this podcast. And again, I really appreciate you listening and going by the website. Be sure to connect with me on the social media. You can do that. There's a big blue button over at startatherapypractice.com. You can connect with me on all the social media platforms. And until next time, Godspeed to you and to your private practice.